For those of you who are joining today, we are running a series of webinars, which are also recorded, that provide advice on the Global Biodiversity Framework's monitoring framework. In the monitoring framework, there's a set of headline indicators, and these indicators are what countries will use to report in their national reports. And so this indicator, under Target 15, it's on the number of companies disclosing their biodiversity-related risks, dependencies, and impacts, which I'll hand over to the presenters in just a second. But I would mention again, because the purpose of the indicators is for national reports, Target 15 is a bit tricky to measure because you would have companies that would be interested in engaging. However, you also have this need for parties or governments to try to do some sort of measurement of Target 15. And so this indicator is really on how this could be monitored at the national level and how this could be aggregated up to give a picture of how companies are disclosing their biodiversity-related risk, dependencies, and impacts. So the people who have been developing this indicator with the ATTAG, supporting the ATTAG in the development of this indicator, have been Odile Kanchu, is representing France, Masha Kemperman, who works for the World Bank, and then we have Natalie Bourgault, who is on the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, who will also give a presentation. And so, as mentioned, we plan to use these webinars as a resource for the future in terms of providing information on these indicators. So they are all available on the website, which I think we'll put into the chat if you're interested in sharing them or viewing them later. Thank you, and over to the presenter.
Thank you, Gillian, and good morning, ladies, or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Odile Kanchu, member of the ATTAG, representing France, as Gillian said. And we are pleased with my colleague Masha Kemperman from the World Bank to present you today where we are with the work on this indicator 15.1, which will be used by countries to report on the target 15.8. So during this session, Masha and I will present where we are, just what I said, with this work on this headline indicator, and also have some words on the secondary indicators and others in anticipation of your work during the Substa next week. And then Natalie Bourgault, who's lead financial market at the TNFD, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, will present the framework that has been developed by TNFD to help companies and also countries in a way, and financial institutions to disclose their nature-related risk, impact, and dependency, which is the topic of this indicator. So what are we talking about next? Next slide, please. As you know, this indicator, this target 15.8 has been included in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. It's a new one, so that's really a new topic, and it integrates new actors to be active in the implementation of this framework, meaning companies and financial institutions. So it asks government first and parties to take all the necessary measures, legal, administrative, and policy measures to encourage and enable businesses, and in particular, large and transnational companies and financial institutions. They have to ensure that they regularly monitor, assess, and transparently disclose their risk, dependencies, and impacts on biodiversity, including with requirements for all large and transnational companies and financial institutions along their operations, supply and value chains, and portfolio. That's quite broad. For that, the COP and the parties agreed on an headline indicator as a 15.1. That's, as you can see, that's only the first part of the target 15.8. And for the part B and C, there is no headline indicator. So for this first part, this indicator is the number of companies reporting on disclosure of risk, dependencies, and impact on biodiversity. You will see later that we are proposing to modify a bit this title. Just to let you know, even if we'll speak today only of the headline indicator, that there are also in the monitoring framework other type of indicator, the binary indicator, that's a question to the country asking if they have put in place or developed legislative, administrative, and policy frameworks to ensure that large and transnational company and so on will disclose what is in the target 15. So, and the country can answer yes, no, but or we are in progress to develop that. So it's to go deeper in that. And there are also some additional component and complementary indicator which are not mandatory but can help companies to not companies but countries also to report. For that we took some indicator from the TNFD, that means the number of organizations within the country that have signal an intent to start adopting the TNFD recommendations, and also based on the work done by the SDG based with the SDG indicators 12.6.1, the number of companies publishing sustainability reports. It's more or less, it's not exactly the same thing, but it's a great start to achieve this indicator. So why has this indicator and this target been developed? The main objective of this indicator is to foster more sustainable patterns of production and financing by reducing the biodiversity-related risks faced by business and finance and their negative impact on biodiversity, but also to look at their dependencies on biodiversity, which can give them some risk, and by increasing their positive contribution to nature. And also by encouraging companies and financial institutions to look at it, to assess what they are doing, to be more transparent, and to report and disclose their risk, dependencies, and impacts. No, not yet. on this topic, to better understand, as I said, what they are doing, and also to address this risk, and above all, to develop solutions to lower this risk and these impacts, and to find other solutions if they are at risk because of the loss of biodiversity and the loss of their dependencies. So there are already several reporting initiatives, but no global comprehensive information, and we'll come back to that afterwards. So it means that this indicator encourages large and transnational company and financial institutions to assess and report, as I just said before, but above all, it encourages governments to formulate targeted regulations and enabling conditions to help and push also companies and financial institutions to act in that way. So on the next slide, you will see that when we began this work, in fact, there were no methodology available compared to other targets where there are already methodology either with Aichi targets or on the SDGs or anywhere, but for us there were no methodology available to say to country how they can count the number of companies disclosing their risk, and it's perhaps not well known also the different target standard, not target but standards and framework which are already developed. So a need to raise awareness and to indicate how to do, or the first way to do that. But meaning that, in fact, in this indicator, there are two levels. The first one is at countries level, because the indicator, yes, and the target ask countries to count. So the first question is, how can countries count the number of companies effectively reporting and disclosure? And meaning that to help them also to see what is needed for them and for companies to be able to do that. So any type of regulation, of process, of event enabling conditions, training, raising awareness events, and so on at country level, as Gillian said at the beginning. And also the second level, that's at company and financial institutions level. Because if countries have to count the number of companies doing something, the companies have to do something. So our aim also was to look after what is available to facilitate the disclosure of these risks, dependencies, and impact on biodiversity or nature at national and international levels. So I give the floor to Masha. Next.
Thank you, Odile, and hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. So I will be talking about the key concepts and definitions under this indicator. And just a reminder, the indicator name is the number of companies disclosing their biodiversity-related risks, dependencies, and impacts. So what do we mean in this indicator with a company? And so this indicator captures large and transnational companies, and not only the company itself, but also their operations, their supply chain, and their value chain. So when they report under this indicator on their biodiversity-related risks, dependency, and impacts, they also have to report upon what the impacts and risks, etc., are for their supply and value chain. Additionally, we're not only looking at like enterprises per se, but also financial institutions. And when they report on this indicator, then also it includes reporting on their portfolio. So on the operations that they finance. And we're not talking about all companies in a country that need to report on these, but the focus in this indicator is really on the large companies. And then what is large, right? So that depends sometimes per country. They have their own definition for what a large company is, and they can, apply this definition as the threshold for including or not including them under the report. And if there's not a definition that is clearly set, then there's always the fallback option, for example, on the World Bank definition, which defines such SMEs as companies being under 300 employees. So automatically, the large companies would have over 300 employees and more than 15 million in assets and revenues. And then what do we mean with disclosing? So that is, I think, the easiest one is making information available to the general public and stakeholders in a clear and transparent manner. Often that means that it's published online on websites, for example. Then
you are muted, Masha.
Sorry, apologies. I clicked everywhere, I think, to get to the next part of the slide. So what is defined as dependencies under this indicator? What we mean there is the aspects of environmental assets and ecosystem services that a company relies on to function. And that basically means, for example, that if you need clean water to operate your business, then that may be an environmental asset that you depend on in order to operate your business. The same for if you need habitats for pollinators, for example, then that is something that you are dependent on as well for your company. And there's many more examples. In terms of impacts, I think that is widely understood by most of them. What is really the change in the state of nature, and it can be the quality or the quantity, which may result because of your company or operations or portfolio that you are financing. And then the risks often stem from these impacts and dependencies. So if you are very dependent on certain natural assets, then and these natural assets are at risk, and that is, of course, a risk to your company. And the risk can be defined in different ways and different categories. And a few examples we're putting here, I won't go over all of them, but ecological risks, liability risks, reputational risks, regulatory risks, market risks, financial risks. So, for example, if one of the impacts of your companies is that there's a lot of pollution going into the environment, that may cause a reputational risk and maybe also a liability risk. So the impact of the companies in the country that you're reporting up for, those may create risks for those companies. And then maybe going to the next slide. Let me see here. So when the countries report on all these companies that are disclosing this relevant information, the recommendation is to disaggregate how many of those companies belong under the different sectors. And the SDG indicator 12.6.1 has also reports on companies publishing sustainability reports. And they are disaggregating by these, well, A to U type of sectors. So we said, let's align with those. So the recommendation is that in the report that the countries will disaggregate for all these different sectors. And then I think I hand it over again to Odile. Please, Odile.
Thank you, Masha. So it can be seen as something new and complicated. And the first question I think for countries is to think about that where is its information and what is on the market, if I can say, for companies to be able to make this disclosure on risk, impact, and dependencies. And there are already a lot of things. As I said just before, finally, you can also have the impression that there are too much and you would need one, but nevertheless, it's a different type. There are different types of things. The first thing is that there are international standards developed for now 2 years by the International Sustainability Standard Board, which has been launched at COP26 in Glasgow, and it's a body, it's a company which is developing international standards, aggregating a lot of different standards in order to give countries the opportunity to apply them, and when they apply them, it becomes mandatory for companies and so on. So, and financial institutions. So they developed 2 standards. The first one was a general sustainability-related financial disclosure for companies to report and to disclose what they are doing in terms of sustainability. That's more general. And the second standard was on climate. And it led to the integration, for example, for those who know of the TCFD, the same as TNFD, but for climate. They are beginning, and they launched a press communique last week, I think. They are beginning to make research and work on biodiversity and nature to be able in 2-3 years to launch a third standards on biodiversity and nature. I say both because on the CBD side, we speak on biodiversity, but on the business and financial institutions, that's mainly on nature, integrating biodiversity. So part of that, there are regional regulation, for example, in EU, in the European Commission, with the development of the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSRD, asking, and it's mandatory, companies, I think that's largest also, to report on what they are doing in terms of climate and biodiversity. So they have to now. There are also national regulation in some countries, for example, France, and I will develop this example a bit later, with a law and an article asking companies and financial institutions, some of them, to make this type of disclosure. There is also a law in India. I heard about a law in China. And please, for the people who are there, if you have any other example, we would be keen to hear about your example in your country. There are voluntary standards like the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, which is mainly on the side of impacts. So asking companies to report what are their impacts on biodiversity and other type of topics. And there are finally voluntary disclosure framework and guidance. The 2 main frameworks which have been developed in the last years are the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, and Natalie will explain us what it is, and also the Science-Based Targets for Nature, the SBTN. And if I'm not wrong, the TNFD is more on saying to company how to assess and how to disclose and make recommendation on it. And the SBTN is also going to how to deal with this type of risk. But Natalie, I can't count on you to explain these differences better than I am doing. Just to let you know that the idea with this indicator is when an entity is doing a type of reporting, depending on all that, it can be counted by the country as a company doing what is asked with the targets. But nevertheless, countries have to, perhaps on the next slide, Yes, no. Before that, Masha will explain us where you can find information.
Thanks again, Odile. Yeah, so when we looked at where the country counterparts could actually gather the information about how many companies disclose biodiversity-related risk, dependencies, and impacts, it turned out that it's a challenging task, right? Because for most countries, there's not a single entity that has the responsibility to kind of gather all this information from the companies and then also assess whether they, tick the 3 boxes in terms of risk, dependencies, and impacts. So we looked at, okay, if those entities are not really out there easily, to find information from, what can be the starting points to look up which companies are disclosing? So one of the sources of information could be the public institutions, the national or international standard setters, regulators, national ministries. And there may be some sort of collaboration maybe needed to be set up to see how, there can be an exchange of information around this, the companies disclosing. Another option could be also to engage with, for example, TNFD or SPTN, or at least look at, their websites, because there are some have lists of companies that are maybe using those frameworks that you could pull into. And then we have the CDP and the WBA. So the CDP also discloses a list of companies that are producing certain sustainability reports. And the World Benchmarking Alliance also gathers information from the biggest companies out there. Then there's international initiatives, UN Global Compact or the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, for example, that are also gathering this type of information, and maybe you could partner with, or at least look at their websites, which companies are providing disclosures. Yeah, UNCTAD and UNEP, they are responsible for reporting on the SDG indicator about the number of companies that are producing sustainability reports. This is not exactly the same, because some sustainability reports may include information about the biodiversity-related risk, dependency, and impacts, and others may not. But it can be a starting point. Then another thing to potentially engage on or look at are what the chambers of commerce have in terms of information. In a lot of countries, you see that the Chamber of Commerce is the point where annual reports need to be submitted by companies, and often these type of disclosures are part of an annual report. So they may be a good source of information, or at least a partner in this effort to gather the data. Industry associations, so that could be also even international, certain sector-focused initiatives around disclosing on nature-related issues. And then NGOs, IGOs, research organizations, there are also initiatives that can be, built upon. And lastly, some other things that, as a last resource, maybe could be looked at is, the annual report simply that companies put out on their websites. And to do this online, data searches of the big companies, their annual reports, maybe artificial intelligence tools could be used. So these are just a few starting points in terms of when you start gathering this information. And there a combination of efforts may be needed to get a full picture. But yeah, maybe on the longer term, where regulations and policies are developed in your countries, there will be more of an organization in terms of that a certain entity could be made responsible to gather this at national level, the disclosures of the companies. I think then we're going to just a slide where there's some links. So if this is all posted online, maybe it would be helpful. Some of the websites where you can look at of these information sources that I mentioned in the previous slide. So just some starting points again for where to start off, kick off the search for all this information. Over to Odile again. Thank you.
Yes, so we wanted to show you an example of what could be done by a country in order to be able to count this and to achieve the implementation of this target 15 and the indicator 15.1. So that's the example from France. That's my country for sure, but that's also where there is an example to show. So first of all, in 2021, France, the Ministry of Finance mainly, integrated in the Energy Climate Law an Article 29 asking asset management companies and financial institutions for their asset management activity. So you see that's a part of the financial market, not everything. And they have to disclose their nature-related risk, impact, and dependencies, and also risk regarding climate. So first of all, that's now mandatory for this type of companies to make this type of reporting. Second, they put in place a sort of process, which is that they have to send these reports, annual reports, once done, to a specific entity, which is the Autorité des marchés financiers, which means Financial Market Authority, which centralizes the reports. Then the reports are sent to a public environmental institution, ADEME, for those who know, and this environmental institution is able to make a comparative analysis and I guess to make a synthesis for the ministries also. So based on the information I got some months ago in November 2023, 700 management companies had done so. So which in the two first year, which is quite a lot. So and the last point is also that in the National Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, more or less French NBSAP, launched in November 2023, there is a specific action requiring to better count companies that are going to report according to the European CSRD requirements. I mentioned that before. So you see a regulation, a process in place, and a strategy. That's an example. There are surely and there will surely be much more example in the future. It's not complete because that's not all the companies and all the financial market which is required to report on that, but that's the beginning. And they also didn't mention any type of frameworks because they wanted to give the possibility to companies to make their choice and report based on the methodology that was the most convenient for them. But it's really a good beginning, and it gives you an example of what a country can do to be compliant with this indicator. And in the next slide, after the example of what a government can do, I will give the floor to Nathalie, and Nathalie will explain you and us what the TNFD as a type of framework, so there are mainly two, how the TNFD can help companies to make this disclosure on nature-related risk, impact, and dependency, and finally help governments also to be able to achieve the target. So Nathalie, thank you for being with us and for explaining all that.
Well, thank you, Odile. Very happy to be with you today. So I'm Nathalie Bourgeot. I am with TNFD, and I'm going to try to explain to you what TNFD does, what is this framework about. The main message being that there is now a way for financial institutions and for corporations to do some reporting. They have a framework that is available, which is the TNFD framework, to report on dependencies, on impacts, and on risks, just like what is being required under Target 15. So this framework exists. It's brand new, so people are just barely starting to use it, but it is there. And it is there, it's an international framework. Any company from any country can use it. It's been designed for very large companies, but it can also be used by medium-sized companies. We are also working to make it accessible to smaller-sized companies, but things will come out in about a year on smaller-sized companies. For the moment, it is essentially meant for very large companies. which are the ones that the target 15 is looking to in any case. So we're right in the echoing what is being asked under this target 15. So let me explain to you what is this TNFD. First, TNFD means Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. So you have nature in there. So the whole focus is nature. Nature in a large manner, nature encompassing the questions of climate, encompassing the questions of the environment, encompassing the questions of biodiversity. It's nature with a large mindset. In our name, you also have financial disclosures because we're about reporting for companies. Now, the TNFD, originally, it's an initiative that was launched by the UN Development Program, the UN Environmental Program, and it was funded by the UN, a couple of NGOs, but essentially by various governments. Among them, you have the government of Germany, the Netherlands, France, I think New Zealand, Australia, and the UK, and a number of governments. So it's a government started initiative, but the idea was to make it a market-led initiative so that it would be companies reporting on what they do with nature and companies saying what is it they want to report on, what is feasible, with an ambition for something that is meaningful for society in the future. So at the heart of TNFD are 40 very large companies. You see their logos here. They're all the largest companies in the world. You have Holcim that does cement. You will have LVMH for luxury goods. You have Nestle for food, and you have Bank of America or BlackRock on the financial side. They're huge. They've worked together for about 2 years, and us at the TNFD Secretariat have helped them work to put together a framework for disclosure. And we've managed to do that. The framework was published last September 2023. This is why I'm now saying the framework is available. It's just right there and people can use it. And in fact, next slide, people have started using it already or promising to use it. And so we've launched it in September. And then in January at Davos, we've asked companies whether they would be ready to use it, ready to start disclosing using our framework for either their financial 24, their financial 25. 320 have said they were promising to do that. That represents 58 of 77 of the different industrial sectors that, you have 77 sectors when you look at the SASB classification. So it means it's essentially from all the sectors. So, every sector is looking at this. It's very well geographically dispersed. So you have a lot of companies from Japan that have said they will do that. You have a lot from Europe. You have some from Latin America, from North America, from Africa, from the Middle East, throughout Asia. It basically represents already 4 trillion of market cap. The global market cap for the whole world is about 100. So just in a few months, you have about 4% of the whole world, of all these very large companies that have said that they will use TNFD. This is a great success, which means that TNFD is becoming the framework of reference. TNFD is a voluntary framework. Companies will do that on their own will. For the moment, it is something that is not mandatory. However, we can see in the future a number of countries, of jurisdictions, make this exercise a mandatory exercise of some sort. And we're expecting this because the countries have to obey by that target 15 and do something and put some kind of legislation of policy so that this reporting takes place in the country. So we provide the voluntary framework, and we hope, or we expect the countries in their jurisdiction to make it in some way mandatory. So what's in the framework that we're proposing? Next slide, please. So in order to develop this framework, we've looked at what was around. And around there's already a lot of things. And in particular, there are a number of standards. The standards that Odile have mentioned. There are some regulations in Europe linked to CSRD, for example, and that are brought by EFRAG. This is this arrow on the right side that I've put here. EFRAG has been something very important. We have built out the TNFD framework using and looking at what EFRAG on its regulation had developed so that we would be converging. And today there is the authorities, the regulators of Europe are saying that using TNFD is very much useful when the companies are reporting under CSRD, for example. They're even writing it. We're making tables of correspondence. We're showing convergence. We're doing the same with TNFD, with TCFD, the Task Force on Climate Financial Disclosures. TCFD has been our model when we've built TNFD, because many companies are already disclosing under TCFD. We felt this was very useful and that they could do the same for nature and do something very similar for nature. So we've built it as an echo of TCFD. Next slide, please. So the framework is at the top of the iceberg. It is 14 recommendations for disclosure. And I'll go over what companies are recommended to disclose on. So it's 14 recommendations. For the companies to do this, they need to be guided. And we're providing a wealth of guidance. We're providing guidance for mining, guidance for chemical companies, guidance for food and ag companies, et cetera, for financial companies, so that they're able to do the disclosures. To develop those guidances, we've worked with business associations. We've also worked with science partners. We've worked with the OECD, with WBCSD. We've worked with the planet. It's been 2 years of intense work so that these bodies, this guidance, be there and really be of help for these companies, because we see companies, they want to do something. They want to say what they're doing on nature. And they had, until we were there, things were going in all sorts of directions. And we hope that if many companies are now using TNFD, what they will produce will be comparable and will give a basis for everyone to say, okay, well, in my country, there is 180 companies doing it. And in mine, there's 50. And those are of similar quality. That's something that we hope we'll get in the future. So next slide, please. So the 14 recommendations, they look very much like, if you're familiar with TCFD on climate, TCFD has 11 recommendations. They're also organized with the same 4 pillars. Their recommendations on the governance. Is the company having a governance that looks at the question of nature? And it's in the different committees, in the different governing bodies of the company. The strategy is the company elaborating strategies that are taking nature into account. There is a pillar on risk and impact management. How is the company managing its risks, its impacts, and it also includes dependencies in there. You know, risk, impact, and dependencies, which is the trio of that you have in Target 15. That's in this 3rd pillar. And then we're also asking that companies have metrics and targets, that this be measured over time, compared, etc. So those are the 14 recommendations of TNFD that are very much like the one of TCFD on climate. Next slide, please. What we're asking companies to do really in those recommendations and in this process of disclosing, it's to make a diagnosis of how their business is being challenged by nature. So it's how they understand how much they depend on nature. A dependency could be a dependency on water, for example. If it's a food company, a beverage company, it will have a dependency on water. If it's a healthcare company, it will have a dependency on water, of quality of water, for example. It's also understanding the impacts that the company has on nature. If it's a company producing beef in Brazil, well, there may be some impact on deforestation in Brazil because of the existence of that, the activity of that company. And the impacts can be pollution, can be overuse of resources. Let's say it's a timber company or a fishing company doing overfishing in a non-sustainable manner. All of this needs to be understood by the company and reported and disclosed. So this is what's at the core of what we're proposing at TNFD, this understanding of dependencies and impact. And from that, the company will explain then and disclose what are its risks and opportunities. The risks can be a physical risk, for example. A company that is, let's say you have a big infrastructure company building roads, has a risk of landslides if you have much more rain coming in, and you're seeing this in many countries, much more frequent rains, frequent landslides. Well, the company building infrastructure is at risk from landslides, and it will, depending on how it's managing that, well, it's very much at risk or only a little at risk because it has taken the right measures. And the company needs to disclose its risk and how it's adapting to the situation. It can also be market risk. They're selling beef. Well, nobody wants to eat beef anymore. Or, throughout Europe, the younger generations are not eating beef anymore. That's a market risk. How are they dealing with it? What's the rest of risk that they have? Same thing with regulatory risk. New regulations are banning the buying products that have deforestation in the supply chain. Well, anyone that's in cocoa, in palm oil, or anyone down the food chain will need to look into that and translate this and disclose how they're dealing with those risks and what is the remnant risk that they're having. So this is what's at the core of the disclosure we're asking. And this is very much in line with what is that target 15 about risk, impacts, and dependencies. Next slide, please. So if you want to see more about TNFD, you can, you as a government or as a government body, join the TNFD forum. TNFD has a forum of about 1,500 members that are all sorts of institutions. In the forum of TNFD, you have NGOs, you have corporations, you have financial institutions, you have government bodies. You can just join, there's no fee for that, and you will get all sorts of information related to what we're producing to TNFD. You can have access to our newsletters, our webinars, whatever. So, if you want to hear more about TNFD, please join our forum. On our website, we have a list of the TNFD adopters. Those TNFD adopters are these 320 companies that have said that they will publish reports according to the TNFD framework. This list is increasing. In fact, it's not 320 anymore. It's about 380 roughly right now, and it keeps building up. So you might want to, and you can look at this list and see which ones from which country, and you get that immediately. They're also organized by different sectors. So if you're looking for, mining, you'll find them, etc. So that could be a good and an interesting place where you will see that you can do your counting. And then I'm also mentioning here the TNFD in a box, which is something that we're producing at TNFD for capacity building. It's plenty of tools for companies, governments to get more familiar with TNFD, to see what this is about. So it helps capacity building. So if you want to build something in your country, this may help as well. And I think I will stop there and have your questions.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I think it's really useful to hear about what TNFD is doing and how this links with how countries could better monitor progress. I don't think there's any specific questions. I do have a question, I guess, for Masha or Dia, or perhaps for Natalie. There are a number of different reporting initiatives, as you know. There's the GRI, there's the reporting through the International Accounting Standard Organization. I can't remember the exact acronym. There's CDP. I'm wondering, how do you see these different organizations playing a part in this reporting?
They're all playing a part. What we're trying to do at this point is for all of us to be as convergent as we can. We're really looking for convergence. GRI and us at TNFD, we're publishing papers together, and publishing papers is to, okay, when you're doing GRI, what does it do? Does it bring you to TNFD for half of it, for 98% of it? What are the portions that you do in TNFD, you don't do in GRI, etc.? We're publishing some guidance on that so that people know when they're doing GRI, how much of TNFD they're doing and vice versa. We're doing the same with CSRD and with EFRAG. We're working very closely with CDP. CDP is more, you're reporting, it completes what is being done at TNFD. It only looks at a few measure points. It's data points essentially, but data points that can be the result of TNFD. So we're doing this with all of them because, what we hope is that companies and financial institutions will just do any of those and get moving. Frankly, that's really the purpose, the end purpose.
Yes, and to complete that, what we you see that in the work we did with Masha, we didn't focus on one example, even if today we invited Natalie because perhaps TNFD is well known now and really global. But what is important to say to countries is that they have to count, and they have above all to push on a way or another, their companies and financial institutions to act, as you mentioned, and independently of the framework or standards that they will choose, what is important is really to act. When I mentioned the example of France, I said that they didn't put any example of frameworks and so on in order to give the companies to this liberty to choose. And I think that's surely perhaps something to do in different countries. There are several things now, several standards. They are more or less all similar, as Natalie said, or working together. And the most important thing for parties to know is that they are ready to develop all these enable conditions and so on in order to push companies to act, and financial institutions also.
If I may add to that. I think so. GRI, they also hold a registry, I think, of standard reports that companies submit to them. So one of the suggestions that we would have is maybe for countries to, like a government institution that will report on this indicator, to maybe engage with those type of initiatives. And the same with CDP. I think originally they focused more on the climate side, right? But they are expanding, is my understanding, also more and more to look at what companies can and financial institutions can report on the nature and biodiversity side. So I think these are all in development, and there's different pieces of information with different organizations, and we're trying to point those out where maybe sources of information are, but there's not right now a single, best source that we can point to. But indeed, the GRI is one of the organizations that countries could tap into. Natalie, it sounded like you. Or is she frozen?
She is frozen. So I don't see any questions. So I think maybe we can wrap up. Obviously, everyone is available for questions for anybody who's watching now or listening later. And so thank you. And I see one question actually, which says, what are the challenges that companies face when looking to report? But Natalie is frozen, so I am not.
No,
sure
I'm back. I'm back.
Oh,
I'm back.
okay. Because your camera is frozen, you're locked in
Yeah.
place for those of us watching.
All right.
Yeah.
So what's the question?
So it's in the Q&A, and it says that this person is working on public diplomacy, and they're wondering what challenges companies face when trying to report using the TNFD guidelines.
Well, the first thing they face is a lot of, some of them have done a little bit of work on nature, but they have done it in their own manner, in a manner that has not systematized. And all of a sudden, what we're telling them through TNFD, and it's the same through GRI or SBTN or CSRD, is that they have to look at things that are very specific. They have to look at land use change. They have to look at pollution. They have to look at overexploitation of resources. They have, of course, they have to look at GHG emission, but that they're familiar with. And they have to look at dependencies, particularly dependency on water, etc., in a systematized manner. And a lot of them so far have done it for one or two of their activities, and all of a sudden they need to do that for the overall company. So it takes time, and we know that for TNFD, they will do this gradually, and that they cannot do perfect from day one. But we're encouraging them to start doing it, even if it's not perfect in day one. One thing that they're struggling with is for companies for the large companies is to look at all their sites and make sure that those sites, how they're encroaching with biodiversity difficult localization. Are they on a Ramsar area? Are they on a national park? All these things, they're not so sure because they have so many locations. So that's one thing they struggle with. But I'm pretty sure that within a year or two, they're not going to be struggling with this anymore because there are plenty of databases and this can be looked at. What they will be struggling next with is how should they be doing in those locations to change maybe and to change their businesses and the way they carry business, because the diagnosis is fine, but then you need to get better. And that's where it's going to become a bit more complicated. For financial institutions, where they're having trouble is that they have to look at their portfolios. Their portfolios are made of plenty of different companies, but plenty by millions for many, and for some it's hundreds of thousands, but it's lots and lots. So what's complicated for them is to get this macro view of all these different entities in terms of this question of nature that are fairly new. So, but they're using databases or data sets that have model data for the moment that are very useful in their usage. And there are already quite a number of tools out there for financial institutions already that they can already do, beginnings of reportings that are quite good already. So, it's in movement.
And what can also be said is that if companies or financial institutions feel alone in face of all these difficult things or things which can appear difficult, they can also develop partnerships. Because the first one who did things, the most advanced, if I can say, financial institutions or company used to develop partnership with either NGOs or experts or scientific bodies or museum and so on, because there are a lot of data everywhere, but perhaps not completely adapted to them. And it's also a way to look in depth in that and see how to deal with all these reporting needs and frameworks.
And one thing, frankly, because a lot of these frameworks are not mandatory; they're voluntary. What really helps is that if there is regulation in the country, like in Europe, having CSRD is really prompting companies to look at this thing very, very closely and to get going. frankly, there's nothing like regulation to get you going.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think that we will wrap up the webinar. I really appreciate listening to the presentations, and it was great to have you, Natalie. And I hope that this is interesting for anyone else who is listening. And bye.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.